We realize many of you are here because of your interest in decisions on a proposed hyperscale data center or multiple data centers in Oldham County. What we will come to realize as the hour progresses is that there are both direct and indirect effects of hyperscale data centers, particularly with respect to the power generation that is needed for them to operate. We have a distinguished panel of speakers. They are shown on the slide there. We have representatives from local government, state government, and the federal government. And we represent each of the centers and institutes that are hosting this, this community event that are listed here on the slide. We have added one more speaker, Dr. Natasha DeJarnett, and we're very pleased to have her. She will be speaking about some of the activities with the West Jefferson Community Task Force, the REACT program in Jefferson County, and some of the tools that citizens can use to understand where environmental exposures occur. So we will get to that. We have a lot of information to present in the first hour. So we are going, in order to make sure that we get through all that information, we are going to hold questions until until the second hour. And the second hour will involve a discussion among all of you. And it doesn't have to be with us. You can discuss with each other. You can discuss the types of things that you've learned in this presentation. And you can discuss the types of questions that you might want to ask your government leaders as they make decisions about locations and safeguards about data centers in Oldham County. I will briefly introduce these speakers as they are scheduled. I'm going to start. We will be covering air, water, soil, groundwater pollution, and various aspects of that. This is generated really by a question that our Judge Executive David Vogel put in the Oldham era, and I've since heard this same question in other ways from our magistrates, that they really need information. And in some cases, I think you might agree after today that they don't know what they don't know. So this will be very important for those people to hear that. It is live streamed. We have many people attending online, particularly because of concerns about a possible adverse weather later tonight. So this information we're going to talk about, we think it's necessary for making informed decisions regarding applications for hyperscale data centers, their locations, and the assessments of the safeguards necessary to protect the public health. And I also want to acknowledge Sarah Jump, who is our staff person, one of the leaders of the Center for Integrative Environmental Health Sciences at the University of Louisville, who's helping us run this presentation. Am I running the slides?
Yeah, you have a pointer. That's just forward.
Thanks. Okay. So one of the first things I want to point out is in this audience tonight are trainees. We are an educational institution, and we train the next generation of scientists in environmental health sciences. We have a Superfund program, so we have trainees in that Superfund program as well. We want those trainees to hear what citizens respond to concerns about pollution events so that they can translate the research that they're doing to the community. So they are interspersed among us in this group, and I just wanted to make you aware of that. Also indicate that we've had some of our past trainees. Sam Satterley has done an outstanding job in making in convincing Jefferson County to make changes in cleaning up what is called the Gully of the Drums, which was a waste site in Jefferson County. The Valley of the Drums is very famous. It's part of what started the Superfund program nationally, but the Gully of the Drums was ignored. And one of our trainees took it upon herself to make the case to the community and to the leaders, and that has resulted in efforts now to clean up that site. Our trainees are, the University of Louisville is in Jefferson County, and most of our interaction with the community is in West Louisville. And so I have a picture there of Riverside Gardens in the west side of Louisville. This is where our trainees are usually interacting. And one of our speakers tonight, Dr. DeJarnett, is going to talk a little bit about interactions with the community in West Louisville. That'll be coming up. But the point I want to make is Riverside Gardens for much of the 20th century was a resort community. It was a rural community. It was a beautiful part of Louisville where people went. There were amusement parks, and it was a lovely place. And what has happened to that location since then is very sad. And I've sat in on community meetings where we talk to the citizens about their concerns about the pollution. And after the pollution has occurred, it's very difficult to undo it. And there's always conflict and those sorts of things. So what I've told our trainees is that this is a possibility to get in on the front end of before the pollution actually starts. So that's where we want to get. Now that little neighborhood, Riverside Gardens, is next to a chemical synthetic plant. That's not a data center, it's a chemical plant. But it kind of gives a picture of what it's like if your neighborhood has a large center in that neighborhood. That is, I think, much smaller than a hyperscale data center, actually. Now, the other point I want to show is just this year, January 2025, a creek coming out of that in Riverside Gardens, that creek turned red. And the smell was very noxious, and they did find out that it was a leak, and they subsequently did clean it up. But the point I want to make with that is you can have all of the regulations that you can possibly think of. Things go wrong. Pipes leak, fluid basins leak, pipes break, things happen, fires happen. And so you've got to be extra careful. You got to know exactly what you're dealing with when you deal with these types of heavy scale industrial activities. Okay, this slide is a little bit difficult to see, but this is very recent data from the Journal of American Medical Association published this month. And what it shows is life expectancy for males and females for each state and for the United States as a whole. This is hard data. And what it shows is that Kentucky is near the bottom in life expectancy, both for males and for females. It's about 7 to 8 years less life expectancy compared to people who live in California. Now, when somebody writes a paper like this, this is the hard data, then they need to speculate. Why could this be? It isn't proven. It's a hypothesis. They speculate. And then that is the basis for future research. And believe me, I'm sure there will be future research. But what they said in the paper was they looked at California, which is way on the top, and they looked at Kentucky. They actually specifically mentioned Kentucky. And they suggested that the cause was the delay in regulation of cigarette smoking in public places. In California, it was very aggressive. In Kentucky, it was very delayed. That isn't proven. They also mentioned maybe environmental regulations are a part of it. It's not proven, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be investigated in the next couple of years. So that's something that Kentucky has to deal with right now, that our life expectancy is less than in other states. I wanted to say one more thing about this pipe leak. I'm often asked to consult for companies, and I very rarely agree to do it, but I was part of a study that showed data that hair dye products were associated with urinary bladder cancer. And that was an association. That didn't necessarily mean there was causation. So the companies came to me and said, you know, what can you tell us about this, and what can you do for us? And I said, well, I can help you find which chemicals in your product might be causing urinary bladder cancer. So they said, okay, fine. So we did the studies. We have systems where we put human enzymes in, because very often when people are looking at toxicity of chemicals, they look at the toxicity in bacteria that don't have the human enzymes to metabolize the chemicals, and so they come up as a negative test. But if you put in the human enzymes, it's the metabolites that are actually toxic. So anyway, we found the chemical. We said, this is the chemical that's in your product, and take it out, and you'll have a better product. And they said, well, that compound is not in our product. And so it turns out, after a lot more studies, that it was a synthetic byproduct of the chemical that was supposed to be in the product. So science is not perfect. When you synthesize a chemical, you get not only the pure chemical, you get other byproducts, and these things happen. And this is something that you need to be aware of. Oh, I want to say one more thing about this. So this brings us to cigarette smoking. I've noticed that nobody in this room is smoking. I believe that's because it's a federal law that you cannot smoke in public places. I've lived through that public policy argument. Okay, I was contacted when I first came to Kentucky. They said, oh, there's a new chairman of Pharmacology and Toxicology at the University of Louisville. He probably is going to be sympathetic to the tobacco industry. So they called me up and they wanted me to consult. I wouldn't do it. But there was a lot of controversy about it. And then, oh my, okay, so you can get it from direct smoke, but not secondhand smoke. There's no way that that's going to cause a problem. People can smoke in public places. But eventually we did get the data. And some of the data was generated right at the University of Louisville, where we showed the metabolic enzymes that were necessary to prove that that secondhand smoke was dangerous and could cause cancer. So these things happen, and I think a lot of this is going to happen with air pollution in the future. We're not there yet. When you're smoking a cigarette, it's a more direct inhalation than if you're walking in a neighborhood where there might be air pollution. Okay, so I'm going to talk about air pollution. So those of you who are older, like me, may remember a time when we had smog and ozone and acid rain. These were huge problems. We then had the Clean Air Act. EPA established national air quality standards in 1971. And for the most part, we cleaned up the air. The power plants got the coal-fired power plants got much more efficient. We had less coal power plants. We had alternative sources of energy. And so things got better. So hooray. And as we get more and more new data, these standards keep getting tightened. And so we have new standards coming up every once in a while for these chemicals. A lot of the focus over the past 5-10 years has been on carbon dioxide and climate change, okay? So coal-powered power plants produce more CO2 than natural gas-powered power plants. So the theory then is, as you move from coal to natural gas, you will have less CO2 and your climate will be in better shape, okay? And it's called greenhouse gases. We are not going to talk much about greenhouse gases. We're going to talk about toxic gases. And those toxic gases are what are generated from natural gas power plants and from diesel generators and gas turbines associated with data centers. So we're going to get into that. We used to have smog, and you could see it. Okay, I've got a picture coming up to the next slide where you can actually see it, bring back some memories for some of you. But even if you can't see it, it's still harmful. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the toxins. One of the main toxins is fine particulate matter. And what you all have to understand is that a data center is not really a local issue, okay? It's a local issue for light and for noise and for electromagnetic force. But for the pollutants that are generated, it goes across the county, it goes across the state lines. Think of the Canadian wildfires. They generated a higher size of particle, a particle size of 10, which is bigger than the fine particle of 2.5, but they come from Canada. So if there are an increase in power plants in Jefferson County, those particles are going to come into Oldham County. If there's an increase in power plants in Trimble County, they're going to come into Oldham County. Why do people want to have increased power? Because the data centers require it, okay? So those are the indirect effects of a data center. The fine particulate matter can be generated directly from the burning of these fossil fuels, or they can, the nitrous oxides and the sulfur oxides can come together with the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons and form particulate matter that way as well. And so that also produces ozone. So we've had many years of progress reducing pollution from electric power plants, but it's still a leading source of air, water, land pollution. There are 3,400 fossil fuel fired plants in the US. They release nitric oxide, sulfur oxide. Nitric oxides, it says there's a collective term for a group of highly reactive gases that contribute to the formation of ground level ozone and fine particle pollution. We're going to talk about those in a little bit. Sulfur oxide, it depends on the quality of the coal, but it's mostly from coal-fired plants, but it is also released. And these, particularly the fine motor particles, can lead to a lot of diseases. Now, I've heard in county meetings where people have said, these are opinions. I want to see the scientific evidence. We are going to show you the scientific evidence tonight, and you will see the scientific evidence. It's coming. Okay, another very important toxin is mercury. We have a heavy metal expert, a toxicology expert among our group, Dr. States. He will be talking about that. And there are actually 188 possible air pollutants that can be generated. All of these are different than carbon dioxide. Everybody talks about carbon dioxide, carbon footprint. That's not what we're going to focus on tonight. Okay, particulate matter refers to a combination of compounds that form particles of a certain size in the air. So the good news, it's better than coal. Okay, so as we phase out coal plants and go to natural gas, there will be less fine particles. Good news. But we still form fine particles both directly and secondary, and the secondary ones are actually worse in terms of health outcomes. And there's a number of issues listed there with citations: lung cancer, ischemic heart disease, increased susceptibility to respiratory illnesses, preterm births, low birth weight, post-neonatal mortality, and children and the elderly are also more susceptible to asthma and bronchitis. Okay, so you may think that we're talking about data centers, but we're also talking about power plants, okay? So why do we need to expand our power plants? Well, it says, it's kind of fine print here, but it says that KU and LG&E want to build 2 new, very large natural gas power plants. Why? To ready the region for a dramatic surge in power demand. That dramatic surge is related to data centers, okay? So when you're talking about a data center health effect, there's the direct effect of the data center, but you could argue there's a larger effect on the power plant that is used to power the data center. So these gas-fired power plants, they're industrial facilities that generate electricity from burning natural gas. Power plants burn natural gas to produce electricity, which results in emissions of nitrous oxide, particulate matter, hazardous air pollutants, and greenhouse gases. We have information for one such, just one new gas plant in Pennsylvania that I listed here. And when it's built, it will annually produce, this is annually, 200 tons of particulate matter, 300 tons of nitrogen oxides, and 100 tons of volatile organic compounds. Now, many of you may not know a lot about volatile organic compounds. That is one of the foci of our Superfund Center at the University of Louisville. And Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, who directs that center, will tell you more about volatile organic chemicals. There are also potential carcinogens like formaldehyde. I believe there are also other potential carcinogens because in studies we're conducting right now, when we put human enzymes into systems, these compounds are genotoxic, they mutate DNA, which presumably then could lead to cancer. Diesel emissions. So the data centers have to have power. I don't know how quickly you think we can build 2 huge new gas power plants to generate these, to generate the power needed for 1, 2, 3, I don't know how many data centers or hyperscale data centers. So diesel power generators will be needed to support the electric grid so that there's enough power to power that data center. And then there's gas turbines. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what's happening in Memphis, Tennessee, where the community there already has the data center placed there, and they're having to deal with the gas turbines and the diesel generators that are spewing out all of this toxicity. It also does affect the environment. The acid rain can affect soil, lakes, streams, enter the food chain, and enter meat and fish. And of course, there's a global climate change as well. Okay, so this is a very recent study. This is a study that's come out in December of 2024. And it's a huge landmark study. It was conducted by investigators in California at UC Riverside and Caltech. And they say the computer processing demands for artificial intelligence are causing increasing levels of deadly air pollution from power plants and diesel generators, according to those researchers. The air pollution generated is expected to result in as many as 1,300 premature deaths by the year 2030. Total public health costs from cancers, asthma, other diseases, missed work, and school days are approaching an estimated 20 billion. Now, here's a key point that they make in this article that is not very well understood. They said, if you look at sustainability reports by the tech companies, and there's been some for this data center in Oldham County, they only focus on carbon emissions, which is an indirect effect. That's climate health. They might talk about water, but there's absolutely no mention of the unhealthful air pollutants. And these pollutants are already creating public health burdens. And so there's a meeting tomorrow in LaGrange for the Technical Review Committee, where they want to know technical questions about a data center. So here's one of the recommendations. Studies authors recommend that standards and methods be adopted that require tech companies to report air pollution caused by their power consumption and backup generators. Now, in my mind, what makes this difficult is you don't know who the end user is. And I will go back to that slide where you saw that red creek. How a industry deals with that sort of error, like a pipe leak or a pipe break, depends on the quality and nature of the end user that's going to be doing that. And in my mind, I need to know who the end user is in order to understand how they're going to respond to some of these things that are going to come up. So do they have a track record? Does a developer have a track record? Okay, those are all questions. Okay, here's this. So I've also heard government officials will say to me, well, we have diesel trucks running on the road. Okay, that's true, we do. There have been changes to the engines and to the diesel fuel to make it safer, but we still do have a lot of diesel powered trucks. In this county, there have been awards given to people who have helped the Oldham County School District change over like 5 or 6 buses from diesel to propane. That's a big deal, okay? That is of no magnitude compared to what we're dealing with here, okay? So the public health burden by 2030 is expected to double that of the US steelmaking industry and rival that of all cars, buses, and trucks in California. That's what we're dealing with these data centers. Okay, so based on that article that I just showed you, this is an article in Newsweek. This just came out this month, okay? The article is in the AI race, fossil power generators are data centers' dirty secret. Okay, and so this is some quotes from that article. They're talking about the data center in Memphis, Tennessee. And they say that one data center will spew out somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 tons of nitrous oxides each year. That's greater than a nearby power station or an oil refinery. Okay, that's just one data center. And so this is an example of a growing trend of data centers using gas or diesel-powered mobile generators and turbines. They almost have to. The electric grid is not going to be up and robust enough in time to keep their data center cool, all those servers cool. So it's going to take a lot of energy, and these diesel generators and these gas turbines are going to have to be used. Okay, so Aruni Bhatnagar is shown there at the top left. He's the director of our Envirome Institute, and he has a podcast series. And he interviewed Dr. Arden Pope, who is a leading economist in the country. And he was one of the leading people in some landmark studies. I remember I promised you we were going to get to some scientific evidence. This is where we're going to get to the scientific evidence, where he was involved in landmark studies. One's called the Harvard 6-city study. Another was then the American Cancer Society study, where they really nailed this down. And industry and government didn't like their findings, so they fought them on it. And so he wrote a book this book here talks about all the political interference he got, all the government interference he got for publishing these studies. That QR code is, I'm going to leave that up here for a minute because we're going to play some clips from this podcast. So the first clip is going to relate to the scientific evidence. As I said, there's been government meetings that say they want to differentiate between opinion and scientific evidence. So this is the scientific evidence about air pollution. And just a reminder, Arden Pope was a key scientist in the landmark 6-city study and the follow-up studies for the American Cancer Society. So Sarah, if you could play this first clip.
The reality is short-term exposure to air pollution was associated with respiratory disease and even some excess death. However, as we analyzed the Harvard 6 cities data, the results suggested that long-term exposure contributed much more to mortality, or at least the risk of mortality than we expected. So in fact, at the time, we were very reluctant to submit the results for publication. We wanted to replicate them in some independently collected cohort. We were able to do this actually with researchers at the American Cancer Society. We were able to use an extremely large cohort that they call the ACS-CPS2 cohort. And we actually found very similar results as the Harvard 6 Cities study. So we submitted both for publication, and it turned out that the results from both of these studies suggested, similar findings, and that is that long-term exposure to air pollution was and is more harmful to health than we ever expected.
Right, and thanks to those studies and many, many others that we've done over the years, it has become quite clear now that breathing polluted air could be harmful to our health. And in some recent estimates, the WHO calculates that air pollution accounts for 7 million premature deaths per year, almost as much as smoking and perhaps twice as much as alcohol consumption, and even 5 times as much as traffic accidents. So how do we get these numbers? How do we know that air pollution kills so many people? You can't be sure that somebody has died from breathing just polluted air.
Yeah, you're right. This is tricky, and that's why it's taken 25, 30 years of really intense research, and not just by myself and my colleagues, but numerous other researchers, including yourself, that have been very involved in this research. And that research has grown dramatically over the last several decades. So, for example, there have been many studies of many different types of designs that contribute to our knowledge, trying to look at this from different perspectives and make sure that we're not sort of missing something or making some mistakes. There have been a number of episode studies, intervention studies, natural experiment studies, various quasi-experimental studies that provided quite direct evidence that periods of high exposure to air pollution have more disease and death. And then there have been these daily time series studies that have been done now in hundreds of cities that observe that daily changes in air pollution are associated with daily changes in death counts and hospitalizations. There have been these very sophisticated case crossover studies that find air pollution contributes to heart disease and even death. And there have been various human and animal studies, some of them controlled studies and some of them quasi-experimental, that have provided a lot of insight into the mechanistic pathways that lead exposure to air pollution and disease.
So we can say that now that there is at least robust, believable evidence that air pollution is responsible for health effects in people who are exposed to it.
Yeah, I think the evidence has become quite compelling. It's hard to explain it away by any sort of simple confounding or anything like that. It's compelling evidence.
Okay, so the next clip talks about, are there differences in risk to air pollution effects?
Are there certain groups that are more sensitive, maybe children or elderly? Have you found in your studies people maybe who smoke or who already have pre-existing disease? Are they more likely to be sensitive to air pollution?
That's an interesting question because what we do know is that short-term exposure to pollution really doesn't affect people that don't have existing disease. So if you're really healthy, just a little bit of short-term exposure probably won't hurt you much. But we also know that even healthy people, if they're exposed over long periods of time, eventually it does harm them. And so air pollution not only exacerbates existing disease, but it contributes to the initiation and the progression of both respiratory and cardiovascular disease, even in people that are healthy to begin with.
But if you already have heart disease and you already have asthma or COPD, or you have allergies and so on, you would be more likely to be sensitive to air pollution.
No doubt about it.
Okay, so the next question would be, what is the toxin that's the most dangerous in the air pollution?
Says how much of these air pollutants are harmful to us. Is there some type of pollutant that we should be aware of?
There's a lot of very, very toxic pollutants that could cause a lot of problems. But of the kind of pollutants that we're exposed to on a regular basis, so certain common pollutants, the one that seems to be causing the most problems is fine combustion-related particles. So these fine particles that come from burning things or high-temperature industrial processes. Both the primary and secondary particles from the burning of fossil fuels, so like coal, diesel, fuel oil, gasoline, seems to be especially bad. And this seems to be a worldwide problem. It's not just an isolated issue. These fine particles from combustion are pretty ubiquitous across the world.
So what we call PM 2.5, when we see them in newspapers and articles, and PM 2.5 levels are the most strongly associated with the risk of the health risks.
That's correct.
You can actually get those levels on your cell phone now. You haven't noticed. So how could these fine particles cause so many diseases?
Now that, as you mentioned before, that exposure to air pollution can increase the risk of death from heart attacks, stroke, from congestive heart failure, and even arrhythmias. Some people have also shown that air pollution can increase the risk of cancer and can harm cognitive development in children or increase the dementia risk in old people and the elderly. How could particles cause so much trouble? These particles that you're breathing in, and they cause such a variety of really harmful health effects.
The truth is there are many answers because breathing air pollution affects the body in many ways, and you've listed some of those ways. I'll talk about maybe one of the most important pathophysiologic pathways that's been well documented, and that has to do with inflammation. As you know very well, we've learned that breathing fine particles deep into the bronchiolar and alveolar region of the lungs can initiate a pulmonary inflammation, and you get these sort of spillover effects as well, resulting in systemic inflammation. In cardiovascular literature, for example, we've learned, independent of the air pollution research, that inflammation, systemic inflammation, in association with blood lipids, results in cardiovascular disease. For example, in a study that you and I collaborated on, we found that elevated exposures to air pollution results in a cascade of inflammatory and immune responses that contributes to vascular injury, atherogenesis, and cardiovascular disease more generally. It would take a lot longer than we have here to try to talk about all of these pathways, but we know that these results are now consistent with much of the epidemiological evidence that air pollution contributes to coronary artery disease, ischemic heart disease events, subsequent heart failure, cerebral vascular disease, including ischemic strokes. I'll be honest.
Okay, then finally, Dr. Pope has some recommendations for us.
The one most important thing we can do is whatever you can do. I'm in a position where the opportunity to do air pollution research, we had a steel mill that shut down and reopened, and so I had a real interesting natural experiment. So I took advantage of that experiment, did the best science I could with it, and then continued to follow up. And my contribution could be a number of things, but one, it can be research. But that's not what everybody's going to be able to do, right? And you talk about this mother talking the doctor into putting air pollution as the cause of death. Around here, it's Mothers for Clean Air. Mothers are incredible what they can do when they band together and take responsible efforts to try to encourage local leaders to not allow more polluting activities to occur, to seek out after clean, environmentally friendly, both activities, business and economic activities and whatever. So we need to do what we as an individual can do. But everybody should be supporting clean air. It's good for us all. And there's no evidence that having clean air somehow destroys our economy. In fact, the reverse is the case. Air quality contributes to human health, human wealth, human welfare, and we should be seeking it. I'm not saying it comes easy, and I'm not saying it comes at no cost, but it's certainly something that is beneficial to us.
Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Dr. Sanjay Srivastava. He is the director of our Superfund Center and world-renowned expert in the toxicology of volatile organic compounds, which are some of the toxins particularly released from the natural gas powered plants and the diesel generators. So, Dr. Srivastava.
Need both of them?
Yes, so this is
Okay.
online, and then
Okay.
this is for.
Thank you, Dr. Hein, and thank you everyone for coming over. I am going to talk a little bit about the things that we do, and essentially give you a little background about the work that we do, and then tell you specifically, as Dr. Hein said, how these volatile organic compounds could be playing a role, potential role with the data center. So this Superfund research program is a program run by National Institute of Health. There are 23 centers nationwide, which are like here in blue, marked P42 centers. So we are part of that center for the last 10 years. And each center has a specific focus area. So there are 2 centers in the country which looked at the airborne toxicants, volatile organic compounds. We look at the effects on the heart disease, inflammation, and liver disease. And then the other one is at Wayne State, where people are studying at the preterm birth and birth defects with the exposure to volatile organic compounds. There are other centers who are looking at metals and other kind of toxins. So this is a nationwide program. And this whole program was started because of a couple of accidents which happened. One in our backyard in the Valley of Drums in the Bullitt County, and the other at the Niagara Falls, where the landfills filled with these chemical waste. There was a big flooding, and these chemicals leached out in the water. And okay, so the adjoining areas got contaminated. People got exposed to these pollutants, and then in order to study what the potential effects, because this happened like 7-8 decades ago, people did not know the potential toxicity of these compounds. So the National Institute of Health started a program where they started established these centers to look the toxicity of these wastes. And the way this program is administered is very unique in the sense that it not only looks at the health effects, it looks at the environmental science aspects, and then trains the young generation of scientists and it is very invested in the community-based research. So adapting the same model, we established this center over here at the University of Louisville in 2017. And our center, as I said, focuses on volatile organic compounds. So we have 2 projects which are looking at the health effects, 2 environmental science projects, and then the training core and the community engagement core and so forth. So what are the sources of these volatile organic compounds? So what are volatile organic compounds? So these are airborne toxicants which have carbon as their base. So they essentially have to have carbon, and then they are predominantly in the air, but they could also be there contaminated in lesser amounts in the water and soil. So industrial sources are the predominant ways we get exposed to volatile organic compounds. Diesel exhaust or petroleum products, they are very rich in volatile organic compounds. And when you have any kind of combustion, these compounds are generated in large amounts. Tobacco smoke is very, very rich in volatile organic compounds. And so are the electronic cigarettes. So when the electronic cigarettes were got more popular in early 2000s and from there on, the initial thing was, well, you know, it doesn't have the same things what a cigarette has, so they are much, much safer, and like there were claims that they were 99% more safer than cigarettes. What turned out that actually the volatile organic compounds generated by some of these electronic cigarettes far exceeds what you get from combustible tobacco. So depending upon the nature and composition of these liquids, you can generate much more higher amounts of these compounds. So the point I'm trying to make is there are a lot of things which you don't predict beforehand, but once you the products are there, then you find out, well, it was much more toxic than what we expected. So we have to be a little bit more proactive than reactive. And then in smaller amounts, these are also generated during cooking, and they're in the household products. So specifically for this group, I think this is something which is a study published a couple of years ago in Environmental Science and Technology, where they studied in Boston area the levels of various pollutants in the air in the natural gas. And what they found was that were 21 VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which were there in varying quantities in the samples that were collected. In 95% of the samples, and there were like 700 to 1,000 samples that were collected, they found that benzene were present and much higher levels than the atmospheric conditions. And then same thing, xylene and ethyl benzene, which is similar class of compounds, which were there in those specimens. Why are these chemicals so important? They are important because I will show in the subsequent slides that these have proven adverse health effects. And another important thing that this study found was that these levels could fluctuate with the climate and weather conditions. So in the wintertime, natural gas derived benzene levels were 8 times higher than what you see in the summertime. So all these things people have to keep into account when you are looking for data center and like how this potentially could have, if it is run by the power is generated by natural gas, then we have to take into account all these potential problems. So the long-term and short-term health effects of BTEX, which is the class of volatile organic compound which are abundant in the petroleum products, benzene, ethyl benzene, toluene, xylene, and styrene. So short-term effects are mostly related with the dizziness, headache, nausea, vomiting, fatigue, blurred vision, etc., which goes away in a couple of days after the exposure. This happens with the very high levels of exposure. What is really alarming is the long-term effects, because they can affect the bone marrow, they can affect the central nervous system and the immune system. And this has many implications that I will not repeat what Dr. Hein is saying, but we has already said whatever you see with the particulate matter, similar thing happens with these kind of chemicals. So one of the example I'm just going to talk about is benzene. So it's a known human carcinogen. It is known to cause stroke and heart disease, and it increases the risk for diabetes. So it is a known risk factor, now established risk factor for a variety of diseases. Some of them are listed over here. So we have to be really careful in terms of understanding that when we are generating these energy, this power to run this data center, what level of these compounds are we generating? And then only we will know the potential health effects. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go more in detail about every other thing. We are studying a number of chemicals which are similar in terms of they are volatile organic compound, but they're structurally different. And several of those, acrolein is one of them, which have adverse health effects, especially in the context of heart disease. So I will stop here. And Dr. Hein?
So next I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Chris States. He's the director of he's a professor and distinguished university scholar in pharmacology, toxicology, and vice dean for research in the School of Medicine. He's also director of our Center for Integrative Environmental Health Sciences. Dr. States has served on numerous national committees, including on national committees dealing with toxicity in children. So Dr. States.
Okay, so thank you all for coming. Excuse my voice, I've got terrible allergies. They've really been acting up, yeah. I'll also add that both Dr. Hein and I have been residents of Oldham County for over 25 years, all right? So we've really enjoyed living here and like to keep it this way. Okay, so I direct the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences Core Center. There are 26 in the country. You can see them located here on the map. It actually puts the University of Louisville in some pretty prestigious company. And many of these have specific areas of focus. Oops. You can get this. I'm going to give you some QR codes. Okay, so if you want to know about P30 centers, here's a QR code, okay? And so the core centers are basically support centers. We provide support to the researchers. We fund core facilities to provide access to highly expensive equipment and the data that they can produce. But what I'm going to talk about mostly is our community engagement core, all right? So first, our long-term objective and our focus is to build a framework to understand how lifestyle factors and sex modify the response to pollutions, right? So how do these things affect different people differently? We are an interdisciplinary center. Many of the members of the Superfund are members of our center. We have 66 faculty members spread across the university and something like 8 of the schools. So we can provide a lot of expertise if people have questions, Our focus area is Western Kentucky. And some of you may have heard about some things like a little tornado that came through here a few years ago, right? Do you know that, trying to remember the name of this town. Anyway, very high cancer risks along the Ohio Valley here in Hawesville. Henderson, I'll talk about this a little bit, has a serious problem with PFAS contamination of the groundwater. We're now focusing out in Calvert City, which has a very high cancer risk, and you'll see why. And we also worked with a community in Trigg County, helping them deal with a hemp processing plant. So our Community Engagement Corps is led by Dr. Luce Huntington Moskis and Associate Director Dr. Ted Smith, who you'll hear from shortly. And they're focused on the awareness of environmental influences and promotion of environmental health. So they serve as a bridge between the scientists in the center and the community at large, and they're experts at providing information in an understandable format on environmental pollutants and their impacts on health. And two of the people that staff that are sitting here in the front row, Sarah Jump and Kat Hayton. So feel free to talk to them too. All right, so I mentioned Trigg County. So there was a hemp processing plant in Trigg County, and it was causing unbelievable pollution. All right, the people there, we got contacted, we sent down some folks, we set up meetings on the telephone. We had telephone conferences with them, and they described what was going on. We sent people down, and they brought some air monitors down for the folks to measure things in the air so they could get some hard data on this place. And you can see it over here, and that's on a light day. Folks there said that the pollution was so bad they couldn't see the road, and they moved their livestock out of the area to some other place. So shortly after our folks were down there measuring stuff, they finally enforced the regulations on this plant, and they shut it down. So that's a QR code to get you to some testimonials for this project and others, all right? And I'll put these on the center website, or actually Sarah will. Okay, so another project we worked on was in Henderson. So one morning, I'm a news junkie, I listen to NPR. Okay. And Ryan Van Velzer did a piece on PFAS contamination in Henderson. There's a Teflon reprocessing plant there. And Teflon is made of PFAS, and the byproducts were getting into the groundwater, which a lot of the people in that area use for their well water. So one of our faculty went down, and did you get involved with this one too, Kat? I think so, right? And so they organized a project with the local high school, and they have high school students measuring fluoride compounds in the groundwater and in the dirt, right? And then we sponsored the showing of this film on how PFAS is used heavily in firefighting gear, and the firefighters were coming down with chronic diseases as a result of that PFAS exposure in their gear, right? So this is, and Dr. Wong was a featured panelist. This was shown at the Speed Art Museum. And we're having the director back again later this year. Our current project that's going on is in Calvert City. So you may have heard in the news that there was a leak on, what was it, New Year's Eve, I think? So Westlake PVC. So just like in West Jefferson County, where there's PVC plants there, vinyl chloride is a starting material for making polyvinyl chloride, and diethylene chloride is another compound that's used there. Westlake PVC perpetually has these leaks, but there was a massive leak in December. We got contacted by the community. Our folks are down there. We have a project going now measuring compounds, metabolites of the vinyl chloride in blood, urine, and wastewater. And the reason is because vinyl chloride exposure results in hemangiosarcoma, which is a very rare liver cancer. And the linkage was made by University of Louisville faculty 50 years ago with the plant here in Louisville, right? And now there's 5 documented cases in Calvert City, one of which was non-occupational. So somebody who just lived near the fence line. So we've applied to the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and actually this project's led by Dr. Smith. Trying to get this grant. It scored well, so we're hoping it'll get funded to continue this project and help these folks out with some hard data. So our community engagement core is open to the community to, if you have questions about environmental concerns or health effects of environmental pollutants, there's the QR code. Feel free to, that'll take you to a request form on the web. So the theme here has been power plants, right? So these data centers consume massive amounts of power. This is the power plant on the west side of Louisville, Mill Creek Generating Station. And what you should know is that burning coal in particular, but also burning diesel, releases heavy metals, including things like arsenic, right? So I study arsenic. That's why it's on the slide. Okay, so let's go back here a minute. So you see this big black thing here? That's a coal ash slurry pond, right? So there's always ash off. Anybody use charcoal in their barbecue grill? Still? I do, but you know all that ash that's left over in the bottom? Well, when you burn coal to make power, you get lots of ash. And what they do is they put it in a slurry pond, or even worse, they just pile it up. And that's what they did at the Cane Run plant. And that stuff leaks. Those slurry ponds leak, right? And so this is another article by Ryan Van Belzer here. And 7 of the 14 sites they checked had arsenic in the groundwater greater than the maximum containment level in drinking water. So especially in a state like Kentucky, where there's a lot of people on wells, right? Wells are unregulated, you're on your own. So Jefferson County has 2 power plants in operation. One is the Mill Creek Generating Station, right? And that puts out about 1,500 megawatts, and it burns coal. The Cane Run Generating Station currently is only putting out about 700 megawatts from natural gas because they retired the coal-fired part of it, which was another 700 megawatts. But you can see in these pictures, you can see the coal ash slurry ponds, and over here is a coal ash pile right next to a neighborhood, and the ash blows off into the neighborhood. And we have a study that was done by Louisville faculty that shows that there's behavioral problems in the kids in that neighborhood, which are related to specific heavy metals that are in that blow off. So what I want to emphasize with this is it doesn't stay right there. It blows all over. And so with Dr. Smith, we conducted a survey of wastewater in Jefferson County. And you can see all the sites we sampled and the location of those 2 power plants. And we measured 26 different heavy metals, one of which was barium. And barium showed up in everything. And I scratched my head for, what, months? Trying to figure out what's going on. And so I dug into the literature and I found that barium is a marker for coal exposure, right? If you're burning coal, one of the heavy metals it releases is barium, right? And so it's spread all the way across Jefferson County because we found it in the wastewater at levels well above the tap water. So it's in all the tap water, by the way, too, because we burn coal all over this country. So, and this is Oldham County up here, right? All right. So closest power plant to here is Trimble County. It burns coal for 500 megawatts. It has another one that does 760 megawatts, also coal-fired. You can see the slurry pond right there. And it also has natural gas turbines, putting out about 1,000 megawatts. This data center they're talking about putting in here, 600 megawatts. That's 27% of the capacity of this power plant, right? Take that in for a moment. That's a huge amount of electricity. And that's if they actually send it over the wires to Oldham County. What's more likely? What's more likely is they're going to have on-site generation, all right, which is what's happening at most of these data centers, which means that this pollution is going to be even closer and more highly concentrated. All right. Okay. So I'm open to questions. I guess we're going to hold them to the end. That's a QR site code to our community engagement inquiry form. Feel free to use it. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach States. We're running a little over, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back with 2 speakers. And he is the director of the Center for Healthy Air, Water, and Soil. He has a robust engagement between academic institutions and local government. He's been involved in both state government and county government and city government, and he served as the City of Louisville's first chief innovation officer.
There we go.
He specializes a lot in working with community groups and monitoring pollution levels. So,
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Hein. And thank you all for coming out. And I promise we're trying to make this part of the program move faster so we get to a really good discussion. I just wanted to give you a little background. You probably heard from a couple of the other speakers. We all work together. We have different areas of focus, and mine, in addition to supporting the Superfund Center and the Center for Integrative Health Sciences, also lead a center at UofL called the Center for Healthy Air, Water, and Soil. And I never have to explain to people what that means, other than exactly what are we working on. We're a small team. If you think of it in naval terms, these guys run aircraft carriers. I have a little PT boat, and we're working our way around some of the most interesting challenges in our communities. So it's a 14-member team. I guess I really don't, this is not like a brag slide. It's just sort of what do we do every day of the week. A lot of our work is in the community where there are concerns about how these things come together. And, you know, in the backdrop of this whole conversation about environmental health is industry. And I think we all understand we need industry to have an economy. And so we end up in this balancing act. And a lot of the work that we're focused on is to try to understand when industry abuts community and where people live, you know, it's a situation that really requires extra attention. We're probably the most diversely funded organization in environmental health sciences at the university. So that's local city government funding, that's state, that's federal, that's several private foundations. We're part of, all of our centers are part of a larger research institute called the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute. Christy Brown is a part-time Oldham County resident. She has a farm 2.5 miles from here. She is a very small part of our funding, just to be clear on disclosures. The vast majority of our funding comes from federal research grants. But the one thing that's interesting about working with Christy and her network of folks is really forces us to really think deeply about our roots in Kentucky and really what kind of future we want to have. And so she's always been a really helpful reminder of that. I'll get back to that in just a second. You heard a little bit about the wastewater work. That all really took off during the pandemic. We've been working, I think, harder than the average bear to try to figure out what else we can learn from looking at wastewater from wastewater treatment plants. And as Dr. States alluded to, we've learned a little bit about the differences in exposure to some kinds of toxicants. We've learned a lot about colorectal cancer hotspots across specifically Jefferson County. You know, we hope that we can use tools like that to try to figure out where these cancers, in that case, are coming from, or where heart disease is coming from. It's really to improve the quality of life. That's why we're doing the work. In the community engaged front, I just want to focus on a few things. We're part of the Ohio River Basin Restoration Project. I don't know if any of you have heard anything about that, but the Ohio River Basin is one of the largest river basins in the United States, and it is the only one that has never received a dime from the federal government for improving the quality of the water. So you can think about the Chesapeake Bay, which has received hundreds of millions of dollars over many decades to try to keep that clean so they can have a fishing enterprise and they can have recreation, all those good things. The Great Lakes Basin that receives regular funding, the Colorado River. So we're working hard to try to put a bright light on water and its importance in Kentucky and in the many states that feed the Ohio Stem River. And this project that we're talking about is also then part of that conversation. So Harrods Creek obviously is a major part of the Ohio River Basin. Looking at the role of changing the amount of water, say, that's pulled from the aquifer and pushed up into surface waterways is not a small thing to think about. We have a whole system that works kind of the way it does right now, and I think we all have to ask hard questions if you want to change the way it works. You can think about fracking in Pennsylvania. They're learning a lot about larger water systems impact when you pump water into the water table. You might be surprised the other unintended consequences you get in other parts of the system. So I think those are going to be good questions. How much water do you want to push into Harrods Creek at what rate, and what will that ultimately do to the rest of our ecology? So it's a good question to ask. We are very interested in air pollution. We've done an awful lot of work and would love to partner with anybody in the community about how we can understand what air pollution issues exist in Oldham County and how we can sort of see those and make those clearer to policymakers and others about how important that is. I can only imagine that many of you chose to live in Oldham County because of its natural beauty and amenities. And I think that becomes an issue when you talk about air pollution, as I think all my colleagues have made clear. It doesn't know boundaries, and the more sources we make that generate air pollution, the more air pollution we're going to have. And I think I'll just sort of close out on some work that we've done on community science. So we just had a big citizen science project, had a whole bunch of people fishing in the Ohio River, ground up those fish and had them tested to figure out what's, kind of what the water quality is in the Ohio. And the good news is mostly better than it's been in a long time. And the only bad news was the high levels of selenium, which we can only attribute to coal burning power plants up and down the Ohio River. So that continues to be the thing that drives fish consumption advisories. So as we think about what we put into the air, you have to realize it's going to come down and it's going to end up on the land and in the water. And, we just want to be thinking about that critically. I will end on the farm that is about 2.5 miles from here. Rootbound Farm is a research partner for us. It is the highest characterized farm in North America. It is currently measuring, it's called the Global Farm Metric Program. It's one of 8 farms around the planet where they're looking at every aspect of how the farm operates. And so that includes what happens to biodiversity, right? And based on the farming techniques that are used, what happens to the quality of the water running off the farm itself, what's the soil quality, all that. I tell you about that because if you have 3 years of highly characterized data about this farm and you introduce, say, an industrial site into the neighborhood, I promise you I'll show you what that industrial site is doing to that farm. And by extension, the people who farm the land there. And then by extension, the people who consume the food that the farm makes. So it's a special thing that we have in Oldham County. I think I don't want to see any bad things, happen. I think the point of that program was to show that regenerative, sustainable farming makes better food, makes healthier people. But, you're just perhaps going to be on the cusp of having a natural experiment to see how that could change. So I look forward to the conversation.
you, Dr. Stubbs.
Yeah, pass it along.
DeJarnett with the online microphone. We're very pleased that Dr. Natasha DeJarnett also could join us. She's in the Department of Environmental Medicine. And Christina,
Am I able to put that up here?
As well as the Center for Environmental Sciences and Program. And she just recently finished a position in the White House Council on Environmental. So she has a lot of information. And she also participates in our meetings with the West.
No, you're fine.
Task Force. So if we do have increased pollution in Oldham County, we may someday have to use
Thank you so much. Grateful for the opportunity to be here. Certainly understand the concerns being felt today, and I want to try to get out of the way as quickly as possible so that we can open up for the community discussion. I think that's one of the most important parts that will take place tonight. Just very briefly, want you to know that I am here. I'm here to be a resource to you, and I'm also happy to connect you with others who may have areas of interest that might be even more connected with you. My areas of interest are community engagement, as well as climate and health, as well as environmental health disparities. So I want to share with you, bear with me just a moment. I don't think that's moving. Okay, great, awesome, thank you. So I want to share with you a couple examples in the community of how community members have come together to organize to help inform change. And these examples both come from Louisville, Kentucky. So I was first asked to speak about the West Jefferson County Community Task Force. And this group in 2000 through 2005, conducted research in collaboration with others in the community. So the West Louisville Air Toxic Study was conducted between 2000 and 2001. And that was then the basis of a risk assessment that took place in 2003. So the West Jefferson County Community Task Force, along with the Louisville Air Pollution Control District, and other stakeholders developed a risk management plan. And this risk management plan helped guide the decisions concerning air quality and air toxics management in Louisville. So this work was done in collaboration with the US EPA, the Kentucky Division of Air Quality. I'm not sure how I am making as much noise as I am. This might help. This is actually why I stood here. I think I will break something, so I will continue in the interest of time. So the West Louisville Air Toxic Study was created in response to other studies that had demonstrated that there are hazardous exposures in West Louisville, and then also longstanding resident concerns that have been raised about air emissions in namely the Rubbertown area of Louisville, which is an industrial complex area that is has a high affinity of a number of industries in that space. So the risk management plan identified chemicals that are above the target levels, and then also provided options to help lower those levels. And that also then led to the STAR program, and let me read you what that stands for, Strategic Toxic Air Reduction Program. And that was implemented by the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control District and adopted by their board. And so since that program's inception, the emissions of Category 1 toxic air contaminants, and these are air contaminants that have a higher cancer risk, have actually decreased in Louisville by 96%. And emissions of all categories of toxic air contaminants have dropped almost 80%. So that is the good news side of the story. I am a Debbie Downer, so I am very proud that I have shared with you some good news. I have some heavier news to share with you, but I hope that you can take this example that the community members coming together and working in partnership with the government, with academia, and with other people that are very interested in making a difference has shown success. So I'll share with you just briefly about the West Jefferson County Community Task Force. So the task force mission I'm going to read to you here. The mission of the task force is to provide research and studies to validate, nullify environmental concerns and issues with the residents of West Jefferson County to empower the residents to make informed decisions. And so the task force has a number of activities that happen throughout the year, and I'll just share a couple examples with you here. I cannot speak on behalf of the task force, so I am happy to point you in the direction of Ms. Arnita Gadsden, who is the executive director of the task force, who can do far more justice when talking about it. But I thought there are some helpful examples here and some things that I think it would be helpful for you to know. First is the annual Environmental Justice Conference that's hosted in conjunction with NAACP. That's taking place on September 13th of this year, and it is open to the public. So definitely reach out if you have questions about that, or certainly stay alert for some of the announcements that'll be soon to come. But it's held every year, and it has opportunities for education around the space of environmental justice, but also opportunity to have conversation and raise issues as they come up around environmental justice. This task force also has monthly meetings. Our meeting was actually tonight, so I went straight from that meeting to this meeting here. And they bring together experts that are in the community that are talking about relevant issues. Tonight, someone from the Louisville Sewer District came and shared, as well as a researcher from the university that shared about health status in the community. And those take place, I believe this is third Tuesday of every month. We also have a very active board. I am a proud member of this board, and there are a number of board members that include enthusiastic and concerned community members, a couple university professors, physicians, other health professionals, people that really care about the health and environment that is there in West Louisville. I was also asked to share about engagement with the Envirome Institute. Ms. Arnita Gadsden, that I mentioned, the executive director, she is a member of the Superfund Research Center's Community Advisory Board. And so this board comes together to really support the bi-directional transfer of information between the community and researchers, so that the researchers are learning from the community and the community members are also learning what's taking place in the research, and together informing the direction of the research going forward. Ms. Gadsden is also a part of our Scholar in Residence program in the Envirome Institute. And then the task force was a part of the Rubbertown Air Toxics and Health Action Project. This project has since been suspended, but there's action being taken to see if that suspension can be overturned. The task force in particular was contributing to the community meetings, the community informed portion of this particular project, and then also working on a podcast and updating the website to help further get out the word about air toxics in Louisville, Kentucky. I'll share with you really briefly about another group that's working on environmental justice issues in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'll just share my personal experience. In 2014, I began volunteering with the Kentucky Environmental Foundation and Rubbertown Emergency Action, or REACT. And so this photo is from an event where we came together to try to hear the concerns of the community, but also get those concerns on the ears of people that can make a difference. So we invited leaders from CDC, I've just said that wrong. So let me erase that. The Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Control, along with the CDC and EPA, are regional representatives all covering all of those spaces to actually hear directly from the community what the concerns were. For me, as my first time engaging with the group, I learned so much that evening, but the concerns that were raised were many that you hear today. There were concerns about a growing coal ash mountain that someone was able to see from their house and had watched grow over the course of years. People talked about trains running right through their backyard. They could actually touch the train in their backyard, and their concern of, what if there's a derailment? What if there are exposures that are coming from this? And this is directly in my backyard. There were definitely concerns of chemical odors. There were concerns of how quickly are we notified if there is a breach, if there is exposures. So these were the concerns that came out of this meeting. We were really proud that we were able to have the ear of people that are able to make a difference, and certainly that people were willing to come and to share their concerns. So I'll just briefly, I'll try to get through this part really quickly, describe why these groups are needed in terms of West Jefferson County. On the screen, you see some of the permitted plants in Louisville, and you can see that those locations of those permitted plants overlap with the demographics of the community as well as the income of the community. They're more likely to be located in areas that are lower income and more likely to be located in areas that are more Black or brown. And then we've talked about that there have been reductions in air pollution in the community, and it's important to keep that in mind. But I'll also note that there's no safe level that is known of these pollutants as well. So we continue to see differences in air pollutants across the community. These maps of Jefferson County, and you can see that there's higher concentration of fine particulate matter, toxic releases to air, and hazardous waste proximity in Western Jefferson County. You can also see that those trends overlap with health indicators, including low life expectancy, which we know in Jefferson County, there can be there's estimated to be a 12 to 15 year difference in life expectancy when comparing West Louisville and East Louisville, where West Louisville has those higher pollution exposures, but also has higher rates of heart disease and asthma. And then when we overlay that with the demographics, it also corresponds with the communities of color and low-income populations. If I haven't depressed you enough, I'll share with you just a little bit about how things have changed in the federal landscape in recent weeks, and how that may hopefully inform how we think about moving forward. Just sharing where we are right now. So it's challenging federally when it comes to addressing environmental concerns. Many websites that were dedicated to climate change and environmental justice, they've gone dark. Environmental justice tools have been removed. The Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, EJ Screen, which was EPA's longstanding environmental justice tool since 2012. The Environmental Justice Index, which came from CDC, the Transportation Disadvantaged Community Explorer, and actually a couple others that my colleague have shared before me this evening. Beyond that, it's more than environmental data. The Social Vulnerability Index has also been removed. So there are executive orders that have stopped work on previous environmental and environmental justice work that was taking place in the government. So that affected the tools, as I just gave an example of. That also affected the data. So some of that data is not available, which means some of that data is not being updated anymore. That affected the programs and the grants that were being funded under there, and then that also affected the federal staff. So this affects the federal response to a number of environmental health concerns. That also affected some of the offices that control this work. So that includes some offices at the Department of Energy, Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, and EPA. EPA has closed their Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. I may have said that in the wrong order. But there also have been a lot of talks lately, and I've seen a lot of chatter about, and I don't want to be speculative, but EPA's Office of Research and Development. I say that in the context of this conversation because that is the office that does the research that informs the regulations. So there are a number of concerns in the federal landscape right now. But there's also some hope in terms of us having access to resources to help inform decision making. You'll see some of the articles that are shown here on the screen are talking about groups that are actually going and getting that data and housing it on other websites. So much of the data you can still access. It's not going to be updated, but that data that was in existence in many cases is still available. I think this might be a big slide. Okay, thanks. Okay, perfect. So I wanted to share with you about the public environmental data partners. If you go to screening-tools.com, you'll find a lot of data and resources that has been rehoused there. This group, it's a group of what I call angels that are working to preserve and maintain access to public environmental data sources. So they have, if you go to screening-tools.com, you'll see links on their front page to a number of the tools, but I'm going to show you a second page that they also have that's helpful. Same website, screening-tools.com, but they also have links to archive data. And if there are data sources that you know of that you can't find, you can also nominate them for this webpage as well. And all that information is contained on their website. I'm going to quickly show you another place where you can access resources. Harvard has something that is called the Dataverse. So the Dataverse has lots of data sets because the data that is no longer available goes beyond environmental data. Harvard's Dataverse has much of that. I will share honestly, it's a little more challenging to access and understand Harvard's Dataverse, but if there's something that is missing, this is where you can find it. It just may take a little bit more time. It is over my head, and I had data in my title, in my job title before, so I give that disclaimer, but it's wonderful that this is there and this is accessible. Harvard also has information on their website on rollback resources, the regulatory tracker, which I'm going to show you in the next slide, and an environmental justice tracker as well. So really briefly, I was asked to share about some of the regulatory implications right now. So this is a snippet from what's on Harvard's regulatory tracker. Each of these tools, each of these rollbacks, and this is a snippet, I should say, but each of these rollbacks have health implications. I think that's been very well evidenced by what my colleagues have shared this evening. But communities that are on the fence lines of industry or highways or other environmental burdens, they're going to have it is expected that they will have a heavier burden and could have subsequent health outcomes related to that. So I'll just share a few. I welcome anyone to take screenshots, and I'm happy to follow up with people in the interest of time so that we can hear from the community specifically. But EPA announced that they'll roll back vehicle emissions for the model year 2027 for light and medium duty vehicles, as well as trucks as it pertains to greenhouse gas emissions. There's also NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. Agencies use NEPA to assess environmental impacts of certain proposed actions. NEPA has been administered through the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which Dr. Hein shared. I worked there for 2 years. And so that has been rolled back, and agencies are now subject to their own NEPA rules and regulations. So there are a number of factors right now that I've described to you: changes in programs, changes in jobs, changes in tools and access to said tools, and a number of rollbacks that are relevant to tonight's conversations. So I certainly hope that you'll take advantage of the education education and the information that exists, that's out there, that's freely available, and the tools that have been rehoused to help inform and help us to understand what is the current status in our community and how could this be impacted. There's my contact information. I welcome you to reach out and certainly look forward to any questions that you may have in the question and answer period. And I'm happy to hand the mic back to Dr. Hein. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now is the time to open it up for discussion. You don't have to address the questions to us. You can make a point, and if person A makes a point, person B can respond to that point. You don't necessarily need to respond. You can respond to one
Are they coming up? Or, okay, how are we doing this? Take one mic, grab both mics. Or, take one that way.
Whoever's answering.
I like this. That's gonna be.
I'll do it.
So one's for online, so if you want to.
My question is for the second speaker, and you talked, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name in the front row right there in the aisle. You talked about BTEX. BTEX. And could you, I didn't quite get the link between that and the data center output. If there is any link, could you link that? And then could you also talk about which form of fuel produces the most benzene? Because you spoke on benzene and those health effects as well.
Yeah. So BTEX stands for benzene, toluene, ethyl benzene, xylene, and styrene. So this same class of compounds which are generated, which are abundant in petroleum products and which are generated by combustion. So anytime you have diesel exhaust or gasoline exhaust, these are generated in high quantities. And the implication for the data center is that if you are going to generate energy by natural gas, the natural gas will be generating these compounds and their levels could be pretty high. So it could have adverse health effects.
Then which fuel generates the most benzene, do you know?
So petroleum products are the major source of benzene, but any kind of combustion will generate benzene.
And I'll hold this mic.
I have a question about the power plants and the gas power plant that was not mentioned in your talk about power plants. And how many, will this plant be, if this place goes through and they have higher demand for electric, will this plant be running 24/7 or?
Dr. States, do you want to handle call?
Okay, so my understanding is that they're going to have diesel power generation on site, which is going to be quote unquote backup. Now, I showed you the numbers. If they were able to send the electricity from Trimble, that would be over a fourth of the capacity of that power plant. And that would have to come over the power lines.
Yeah.
So the odds are, and if you look at recent articles that have been in the news about these data centers, they primarily run their own power generation on site.
Yeah.
So the proposal, as I believe, I think Mr. Vogel's here, you can confirm this, that they're going to use diesel, right? And so diesel is a heavy petroleum product that certainly is going to generate the compounds Dr. Srivastava talked about. Plus, there's a lot of metals in that as well that will get generated into the air.
Just as a follow-up to that, if they do create their own power, it will run 20%.
Oh, yeah.
I can hold it for you.
So,
No, I think I'm just saying, if they do.
they have a plan, it's not that plan. Those are backup generators.
Right, and those generators will be run 15 minutes, each one of them, 15 minutes every month. That's, and, and that they have to do that, and those will emit those, and if they run those 8 plants, 8 buildings, each one of them has a generator bank, same, not the same size of the building, but the same length of the building. And if the power goes out, if LG, the or whoever's supplying this power from offsite, that power cuts off, for whatever reason, this place isn't shut down. All the generators are fired up. They're just gonna have to. And a million gallons of fuel on
24
hours.
Yeah.
Facility to power that thing.
Yep. And we know the power never goes out in Oldham County.
Oh, yeah.
So you may or may not know the answer to this, but my understanding is that the generators on site are going to be called emergency power, and they're not held under the same EPA regulations as a power plant. In other words, a power plant has to scrub their emissions, so assumedly that's going to lessen them somewhat, where the generators on site do not have to scrub because they're emergency generators. And they could also run these generators, like you said, 24/7. So the output of whatever we're talking about here could be considerable compared to a power plant providing that energy. Is that somewhat correct? Door number one. Door number two is?
I'm not familiar with the regulation of those on-site.
So if I look at generators.
Taking that as a given, then yes.
I'm looking at generators that are cataloged
Yeah.
for these purposes, and the outputs are considerable. My assumption is that, coming from the, whatever you call it, factory that makes electricity is going to be less. So I think our concern has to be what you're saying. If it's local, it's going to be considerably more than somewhere else.
Yeah. So in terms of the power plants, I'll add, on my drive over here, I was listening once again to the news. And it was actually the financial show, and they were talking to the people that build the gas-fired power. And there's a shortage of them, and they don't see that shortage is going to go away. So that source is not going to be readily available to fill the need.
5 to 7 year lead time.
Yep.
Right. So
these are going to be running on diesel
and
emergency for a long time.
And the existing power plants that we have are going to be running 24/7, full capacity to try and feed those things.
I can hold it here.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, it seems to me, the presentation, I've seen presentations like this before, and you kind of started out with a toxic dump and you're comparing it to a data center. It seems to me that all of the toxic part of this from your presentation is with the power generation, not with the data center itself. I don't think you mentioned anything that was toxic about the building itself, except the power supply. And you got to run 15 minutes a month, and you got to make sure your backup is there. But diesel generators are extraordinarily expensive to run for a 24-hour day thing. So that can't be the plan. It just can't. So it seems to me that the real beef is with the power coming to the data center, which, if you want to, if you want to argue with that, we'll argue with LGD, put in more renewable energy or whatever. But it's not with the data center. The power, the whole area is going to need more power anyway. Energy is wealth. Think about, the next generation, the generation after that. Power is coming whether the data center comes or not. And if you don't want the data center here, it's going to go someplace else. And like you said, it was a national problem. Okay, sorry, I'm just rambling here. But comments?
So the data centers are inextricably linked with the generation of power, right?
Oh, Dr. States needs his mic. Okay.
So, yes, the power generation and the data center are two separate entities, but the data center doesn't exist unless it gets the power. Okay? So the power has to come and be generated.
So power may still exist without the data center. As EVs,
Doctors, as experts in your field, I know that this is a very leading question, But as experts, you all would have much better guidance for us than we have ourselves. We can do as much research as possible, but you are the subject matter experts. That being said, what, in your opinions, would be a safe distance, a safe radius from both a power plant or from a data center? And I also have a follow-up question.
Safe distance. What's the distance from Mill Creek to the county line over here? 4 miles. And we detected.
Probably 40 miles.
Well,
40
cross
miles.
Jefferson County.
40 miles.
Okay, and we detected evidence of contamination from the coal-fired power plants across the county. Now, there's a gradient, yes. Okay, it's a gradient, but, you know, given the choice, do you want to live 2 blocks away from a power plant or 20, 30 miles? Probably 20, 30 miles, but I can't tell you there's a safe distance, right? I mean,
Like I said, maybe.
yeah, burning fossil fuels generally is something that we have to figure out how to stop doing that for health reasons.
Follow-up question. You had said before your presentation, I believe it was, that you were going to speak about Memphis a little bit. I don't recall us getting into that section of things. If you all could touch back on that.
We have a 3-minute video on Memphis if you wanted to watch it.
Watch it. Play it. All right, we'll play it.
It's three minutes. I'll just preface it. As you watch this, think about the mayor of Memphis and whether or not he now thinks that the data center there improves economic development in Memphis. So watch this. This is a NBC News 3-minute clip. Again, very recent, the last week. This is what happens when you don't get in front of the situation. They're dealing with it after the fact. They feel like it was railroaded on them.
It's your last slide, right?
Yes, it's my last slide. You should be able to click right on the PowerPoint. Yeah, the Muscat drive. No sound. Oh, the sound button is muted.
I can't see it.
Right there. Go back. Go back to the right.
Good?
Yeah. Did you click it? Okay. Is the city's mayor. Exxon says it will create $100 million in revenue and hundreds of jobs. But the difference remains higher. That's a bit. These are the gas turbines fueling the supercomputer they call Colossus. They emit hazardous pollutants like formaldehyde and nitrogen oxides, according to the manufacturer. Just over his face, you can see and hear the turbines churning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Without them, the data center does not function. That's not a dispute. The fact that they are polluting the air. What people don't know is how much of that pollution is reaching nearby communities. Eastern Knox lives 2 miles away. You smell it. Right away. Absolutely. Well, we don't have to get such a broken Knox lives in Bobstown, a mostly black, low-income neighborhood in South Memphis.
The health department, they need to be ashamed.
Where industry has taken a toll for generations.
There's a lot of people in that health department, like breathing issues.
Cancer risks here are 4 times higher than the national average. Cancer killed her father and other relatives, Knox tells us. Life expectancy here is 9 years less than the national average. Elon Musk's company is not to blame for those numbers, but that legacy and those turbines have driven a backlash against XAI. Recent health department hearing turned into a shouting match. An executive from XAI ducking out a side door. The mayor says the city is hoping to start testing the air in the next 2 months.
Right now, there are people in my community that feel like they have been wiped out by XAI. That they were part of the conversation when it was approved, and now they're bearing the brunt of its existence. Well, I think it's important for us to rate their concerns, TPCs.
Among their concerns, the company is running the turbines without a permit. But the health department says that's okay for the first year. And after city officials said there were 15 turbines, environmental advocates released this thermal image. They say it shows twice that many active.
But some of us already called. We had a conversation. It's not in this additional.
So they're not using those.
And I don't know.
XAI declined to be interviewed. It tells NBC News it is using pollution minimizing technology and working with public officials to stop relying on the turbines by the end of this year. XAI has also pledged to build a water treatment facility for the city.
Elected officials are working for and conspiring with industry in order to draw profits.
Community organizer Keyshawn Pearson has lived in South Memphis most of his life. He says he is skeptical XAI will create hundreds of jobs and doubts the mayor's promise that its tax dollars will be directed to improve these neighborhoods.
We don't want money in exchange for our loans or in exchange for our lives. We want clean air, we want clean water, clean food, just like everybody else.
XAI is already building a second supercomputer nearby, even bigger, that will need even more power, raising new questions, more anger among some residents on Stratford.
Okay, Stephanie, thank you.
So, Oldham County or LaGrange, I'm not sure which one, has the Be Kind moniker, friendly place. You learned a little bit about Louisville and West Jefferson County and what they have to deal with. You're learning a little bit about what Memphis has to deal with. Unfortunately, their problems are already established. Those plants are already there. Oldham County has the opportunity to stop it, or at least make sure that the safeguards are in place. You need to know who's going to be running the thing, how many turbines they're going to run, how many diesel generators they're going to run. There's so many questions that are unanswered that I think need to be answered.
We're gonna get this one right here and I'll come over to you, sir.
This farm has lots of karst soil, sinkholes, and it's on Harrods Creek. Can you talk about the impact to the watershed and the water quality?
So we've intentionally not focused on a particular location because in many ways it's mysterious. There are rumors that there are multiple sites that are under contract or purchase agreements in Oldham County. And there's been some suggestion that it won't be on the Highway 53 site. But we don't know how many sites they're going to be, where they're going to be, who the end user is. So actually, I don't know about sinkholes in the Highway 53 site. I do know that the PR firm has generated environmental reports. When you read their literature, it's actually extraordinary. They say that they will alleviate every concern that the community has about this data center. Well, it's the most profound statement I've ever seen. They said, every concern that you have, they will address it. Every one. That is not a serious statement. And that lends me to believe that these are not serious people. And for them to say something, that's in there. Can you go, where's Sarah? Sarah, just go back one slide for me. I don't want to pick on this individual. I don't know him. So what flashed before my eyes. One slide back. One slide back. Okay, that's it. So this is a statement put out by the PR firm. It's also appeared, the same quote has appeared in the Career Journal. And as a scientist, I just find this absolutely incredible. So it says, my participation, this is from the paid consultant, my participation will assure that the data campus, that's an interesting euphemism, the data campus exceeds requirements, addresses all concerns, and benefits the entire community while preserving everyone's quality of life. So if, for example, there should be a technical review committee meeting coming up, you might ask them if they are going to address any concerns that you may have learned about this evening.
All right, we have another question.
Hello. I'm not sure who this is directed to, and it's possible you don't have an answer. Maybe we can follow up. There are two concerns that I have that are local to Oldham County, and that would be, it would be great to see a profile of what the pollutants and the distance that is affected from producing 600 megawatts from the Trimble County Power Station versus these generators. So my assumption is that these diesel generators to produce 600 megawatts of power are going to be much higher pollution because they don't have those environmental mitigations as part of those. And the distance that they're going to affect is going to be much more localized. The reason they make those smokestacks so tall is so they spread the pollution out over a large area. One of these generators are a few meters high, and therefore it's going to be the local property owners that catch the brunt of that. So I don't know if you can answer that. The second one that might be a local possibility is the new technologies that they're using in data centers to cool them is not using water to cool them. They're using new fluids that are non-conductive. It's what they call fluorinated fluids. What would be the impact of some of those fluids if those were to be spilled into the groundwater? And that wasn't part of your talk, so you may not be expert on that question, but if we could follow up, that would be great. Thanks.
Well, I mean, look,
Hold on.
Thank you. That's great information.
Need you online.
oh, we got to be online too.
Yes.
Yeah, both. That's good. I think you actually raise a bigger class of opportunities and issues, which is the data centers that we're building today are not the data centers that we will be building 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? As you point out, I mean, this is a very expensive business, right? So at some level, it's just a matter of perhaps stating your requirements, right? So if your requirement is don't exhaust our aquifer, then that's your requirement, right? It's your community, you decide. Because these companies are not going to be able to keep working at this cost structure. I mean, that's and they won't just do it anyway, right? They're going to try to save money, and they will do it. They'll get better at it, right? So some of this conversation is just about the place in time that we are, right? Rubbertown was built when we were fighting a world war, and we needed synthetic rubber desperately to fight a world war, right? So that was a different time. We wouldn't probably build Rubbertown today where it is. So I think, I don't know how you factor that in the conversation, but it's clearly an important part of it. Communities that get data centers 10 years from now will have different data centers than the ones that we're talking about right now, or the one that they built in Memphis. So, I encourage you to think about how you manage the time frame for all this stuff. I surrender all my microphones to whoever. There we go.
Got one over here.
I want to address the question that somebody had over here regarding the sinkholes. And this is specific to the Highway 53 site because that is the battle that we're fighting right now. And the gentleman mentioned that there are potentially other land sites under contract in the county as well for other potential data center sites. So those will be the next battles. But right now for Highway 53, we pulled up the Kentucky Geological Society maps and found that there are roughly 30 sinkholes, potentially 30 open sinkholes on that site. So it's not a particularly good site to be developing an industrial site on anyway. Obviously, if anything spills into those sinkholes, it could potentially impact drinking water, well water, and aquifers in the entire region. Additionally, their own environmental report says that there are roughly, or not roughly, but exactly, identified by RES, the environmental consultant, 60 wetlands and streams on that site. And approximately half of those are under the jurisdiction of the Army Corps of Engineers, which means they're going to have to go through extensive environmental reviews and permitting, which could take upwards of 1 to 2 years just to get sign off if they're even allowed to build on the site. So the site is very problematic. Even for a residential development, it's problematic. It is the worst location to put an industrial site because of the potential environmental impacts. Now let's talk about the diesel fuel storage. We know that roughly to run the temporary generators that are required to keep the 600 megawatt site running is 1 million gallons of diesel fuel a day. Somebody mentioned it over here. 1 million gallons of diesel fuel a day to power the generators. These data centers cannot go down. They have to keep them running 24/7. So when we have a storm, and we know that we've had up to 5, 6, 7 days where we don't have power, especially out in that area, they have to have enough fuel stored on site to keep that site powered for days. A lot of these data centers require up to 72 hours or even more of backup fuel. Folks, that's 3 million gallons of diesel fuel that will be stored on the site, most likely for a 600 megawatt data center. Now you have to factor, they require redundancy for their generators and for the fuel storage, and they also have to calculate in like inefficiencies. It could be up to 6 million gallons of diesel fuel stored on a 600 megawatt site. So keep that in mind. We want to invite all of you to technical review tomorrow to ask them what is their plan for that.
I have a question about electromagnetic radiation, whether the data center will generate any type of electromagnetic waves, and if so, is that any type of health concern for either people living in the area, livestock, or people that might be driving by one of these facilities?
So there are studies that indicate that would be the case. They are more localized toxicity than countywide, but they certainly would be a toxicity to both people and animals.
Okay, you, and then you, sir.
So I wanted to address the difference between the data center and the energy storage and the potentials for some of the problems with both. So you had, and yes, I am speaking specifically to you. You had said that most of the presentations seem to be problems with the energy production. Keep in mind, these hyperscale data centers have not been built on this scale for more than 5 years. Data centers are much newer, and hyperscale is even newer than data center. Science is interesting, but it doesn't always move fast, especially when you're talking about the impacts to environment, the impacts to human health. So you do have to consider, we might not know what those data center effects are. And right now, any of them, we've talked about what some of the problems that we expect to see from data or from energy generation. We didn't know that when those were starting to be built. That's why they're built the way they are. We don't know what the problems with the data center are going to be. So right now, the problem is we need to be putting in regulations that will protect our citizens and our county against the potential for that. We don't know what it is right now. Additionally, I'd like to ask, are any of you comfortable speaking about what some of the health effects are to children, particularly from all of these contaminants that we've talked about? Our schools have been promised millions of dollars to their coffers. From what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing in my own research, they're going to need every single penny of that to deal with behavioral, to deal with health effects. Are any of you comfortable speaking to the impacts to children?
I got you.
Okay, yeah.
So as Dr. Pope mentioned, he did mention neurological effects, including effects on learning. I would say that that data is not as robust as the cardiovascular data. But I think particularly in light of the increased pollution that we are most likely going to experience across the nation, that will be an area of active investigation. My guess is that it would have effects, but I mean, they clearly, you have lost school days from kids.
Hello. I was thinking they're not going to use these new power stations or the generators. They're going to use both, and they're going to build more. They're not going to stay at just one place. They're going to be cookie cutter, it'll spread, metastasize. They want to spread out all over Trimble, Henry, Oldham. Everything that you know about Kentucky is going to be eaten up by this. They can't answer a single question. Not how many gallons of water they're going to use, not how many 600 megawatts, what the pollution's going to be. They can't answer any of this because we don't even know who's going to be the end user and what they're going to build, to what they're going to take. Are they going to have, 6 buildings full of boards and machines, or are they only going to need 5? Are they going to come out with new technologies that use less energy per board or more? They can't answer zip zero, they can't even answer who the owners are or anything else. In the last day or two, there's come out that the Saudis are going to put tons of investment into America, trillion, on level of billions of dollars anyway. That's going to be directed toward data centers. It's a whole new slush fund from beside, like Facebook and Google and all this. The Saudis are going to go all in, and this is going to expand. They're already working on a few places in Oldham County. Once they blow this open, they're going to take over a flat spot in the highway, I guarantee you. And I can go on about this, but we just don't know what we're looking. We just don't know what we're looking at here.
So if I may, I can address the child question. So oftentimes children are affected, but not immediately. So they're developing systems are susceptible to changes due to toxicities that occur 20, 30 years later, all right? So increased and earlier onset of heart disease, cancer, right? Things like that. So the effect on kids may not be immediate. It may be sometime down the road where they'll manifest diseases that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten, or at least wouldn't have gotten so soon.
Yes.
And that's my greatest concern. I have 3 grandchildren growing up 2 miles from this site, the youngest turning just 1 recently. So if anybody ever wants to make a human chain, make sure I know. That is my greatest, thank you. That's my biggest hang up, is how it will affect the brain development and develop of my grandkids. Thank you.
Okay, Dr.
I wanted to hop in on the response also on children's health. There are a number of factors of why children are more susceptible. They are smaller, they're closer to the ground, so they're closer to ground level pollutants. They are, again, smaller, so they drink more water and take in more air for their body weight compared to us as adults. There's a paper, a scientific paper that came out 3 years ago that showed that breathing in fossil fuel related air pollution can affect every organ system in the adult body. I was challenged in a group that I was working with. We took that report and we kind of made it into an image. And somebody said, well, what about children's health? And so we went to look at the research that existed on children's health and found the same was true for children's health as well. So I appreciate this question. I feel the expression that you're sharing as you consider the health of our children. We are judged as a nation by how we prioritize the health of our children. I would look to Mom's Clean Air Force. They may have some very helpful resources when it comes to maternal and child health. I would also, there's a tool that's called the Internet Wayback Machine. EPA had a Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee. I would also look to their resources as well. Thank you.
I am glad to see some magistrates here. Do you have any suggestions? We were told that there's engineers and very smart people as magistrates, but they're still trying to make decisions. I would say one session with you, my decision is made. How do we get this across to our government officials? Because you deal with this a lot. You know, you find areas that are polluted, and then people just don't want to. Even on this show you were showing, you know, we're going to test the air in 2 months. Why not tomorrow? You know, how do we promote this? This is really important stuff. This is our lives, and how do we make them listen?
I just remind everybody that this session was live streamed and is recorded. So we can share it with the government. If you remember my first slide, that was one of the main purposes of this event, was to share information with the government who was asking for additional information. And your discussion is part of that information that they need to hear.
I have a question. I live on property adjoining that lump of land there. I mean, we'd be able to see it. Yeah. And we have a swimming pool. And I'm just wondering how, if something ever happened and they did build that, does that do to the water in the pool? Close it?
Water guy.
Water guy.
I don't know.
I don't think there's an issue with the pool. I think the issue as it relates to water is this ambient air pollution issue, right? So, I mean, take some comfort there.
Groundwater, maybe, yeah.
And the one thing we didn't talk about was noise, but we have another meeting to talk about noise.
Or light.
Got that.
Or
light,
light.
right?
Got one over here.
She's over there.
In the spirit of collaboration, has any consideration been given to collaborating with UofL Law School to serve all of those who claim that this is, I'll say, safe and effective, that perhaps that they would take personal and professional liability for all the harm that comes to the community and have them sign a document, a contract. They will be personally and professionally liable for all the harm that comes to the community. And it's in the form of a notice of liability. If UofL Law School would help with this issue, then we might be able to see government officials, corporate executives, personally and professionally liable for the harm that comes to reproductive harm to the third generation, to the farmland, to the animals. But what about involving UofL Law School or other law schools?
I think we have our Center for Integrative Environmental Health Sciences, which has legal law school professors on it. And they will be made aware of this. We do have a hard stop at 9:30. We only paid through 9:30. Nate, I might ask you if you might want to wrap this up. You might say something about the legal aspects.
Thank you for the notice.
Go.
But I have a few words prepared. I used to work for a really neat old man. And he had a saying about questions. And he said, if you want a fast answer, the answer is no. If we haven't done our research and we haven't got the regulation in place, and this is new technology that's going to be coming around for years and years to come, then what's the hurry? Oldham County is the richest county in the state. We make $1.2 million a year off the interest. We've got over $40 million in the bank. The bills are getting paid. What's the hurry? So we need your help tomorrow. TRC, I need everybody here. The whole room, fill it up. Fill it up. If these guys don't feel any pressure, any heat, if they don't feel that, they're going to act accordingly. If they don't hear your voice, if they don't see your grandkids, if they don't see your wife, they will act accordingly. They're just going to vote this thing through. They will. There's no pressure. There's no consequence. The current perception is a reality. And if I'm a 70-year-old politician that doesn't know crap from Shinola, that's what's going to happen. So it's your job to inform these folks about the dangers of hyperscale data facilities and fast answers. And the real answer is no.
Thank you everyone for attending. And as Mr. Oberg said, you're encouraged to attend that session tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Thank you.